Hello, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Crooked Illness. I am excited about this episode right here because my guest, Frank King, is joining me to talk about the 5 TED Talks he gave on mental health, the work he is doing for suicide prevention, and more. Frank King is a TED Talk coach, a former writer for The Tonight Show for 20 years, and a speaker and stand-up comic who has worked with Jerry Seinfeld, Adam Sandler, Jay Leno, and Ellen DeGeneres. So without further ado, welcome Frank to the podcast.
What is it? Ado. Without further ado.
Further ado, Frank, you are here.
That is correct.
Welcome.
I didn't think it was going to happen, but
I know. We got it. We got it working. We are here and we are ready to dive into this today. So I'm excited to hear from you. I want to get into this. So tell me a little bit about yourself before we dive right in.
Started comedy in 4th grade, told a joke. Everybody laughed. Students, teacher was hysterical. I thought, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian.
And it started right there.
Yep. And then 12th grade, there was a talent show. Nobody had ever done stand-up before. I did stand-up and I won. I was going to be a comedian at that point, but my mama forced me to go to school. College. Yep, UNC Chapel Hill. I said, Mom, I'm going to be a comedian. She goes, son, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder, but you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree. So then my high school and college sweetheart and I moved with the insurance company I was working for out of college to San Diego. There's a branch, still is, of the Comedy Store, the famous one up on Sunset in Los Angeles. Did open mic night. About halfway through my 5 minutes, I thought, I'm home. I'm going to do this for a living. I have no idea how, but I am. A year later, I asked my girlfriend if she wanted to come along on the road just for the ride, because I was going to be a professional stand-up comedian, and figured she'd say, hell no. She said, yeah. So we put everything we couldn't fit into my tiny little Dodge Colt into storage, gave up our apartment, our jobs, and hit the road for 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop.
Wow. That's amazing. Because remember we talked before, you were talking to me about The Tonight Show, because you also worked on that for 20 years. You did stand-up comedy for 34, right? 34, and you're still doing it.
Yep, still doing it. If anybody wants it and they're willing to pay for it, I'm happy to do it.
Still going. Wow. So how did you get into writing for The Tonight Show?
Well, Jay was the permanent guest host for Johnny back in the late 80s. And Johnny would say on a Friday night, listen, I'm going to take off next week. Jay had 4 nights to cover 18 jokes and monologues. So we started hiring comics who were on the road as contract labor. Signed a contract form, submit 12, 24 jokes a day. And I was probably getting 2 on a week in the monologue. And then when you got the show for real, they cut loose most of the contract labor, but they kept me on, a couple other guys. So we wrote until he left the show.
Wow, that's awesome. And I remember you talking about doing that, writing for 20 years, and how you transitioned over into doing what you do now, which is TED Talks and coaching for TED Talks. So how did you get introduced to the idea of doing a TED Talk on mental health?
Well, after the recession started in 2007 or 8, speaking business, corporate comedy business dropped off 80% overnight. We lost everything in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine came up to me after a keynote. He'd never heard me say that I didn't pull the trigger. And he said, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? Hey, man, how come you're sounding so disappointed? What it was that when the recession was over, they started booking speakers again. The people who've been booking me as a comedian said, Frank, we love you. We can't pay you that kind of money just to be funny. You got to teach us something. So I looked at my family history of generational depression and suicide, my close call, got some, training in suicide prevention. And in 2014, did my first TEDx talk in an effort to rebrand from a funny speaker to a speaker who was simply funny.
Wow. Because I remember you were telling me about that when you got on stage and you were talking about that, and you said people were shocked to hear because they had no idea that they had no idea that you were suicidal, that that was in your family and your family history. And, what was that like?
Well, I was 56 years old and nobody knew. My family, my friends, my wife, nobody knew I was depressed and suicidal. But I came out on stage at that TEDx talk, and the YouTube video went up about a month later. And I told my wife, before you hit play, I got to tell you about half a dozen things you don't know about me. I don't want you to learn watching the TEDx. So, and then from that TEDx, I got phone calls for 2 more. They said, "Do you have any more mental health topics?" Oh yeah. And then I auditioned for actually 4 more. I got them all. 2 of them I could do. The other 2 I couldn't do because I had full fee speaking gigs. Guys got to eat. So I was thinking the other day, I've turned down more TED Talks than most people have.
Wow.
Broke my heart. One was in LA, one was in Sun Valley in a gorgeous theater, but I just couldn't. I was working a cruise. I couldn't physically get there and get back. So
Yeah. Wow. So what was that like? Because I know you said when you got on stage to do your first one in 2014, where you talked about being suicidal and like your family history and everything. What was that like when because I know you said your wife didn't even know. She
nope.
didn't even know. So what what was her response?
Well, she got a little choked up. And I think if you have mental illness, you should share that with your family, friends, people you trust when you're ready, because things melt down. It's nice to have people around who understand what you're going through and are not going to be judgmental, not going to, as they say in the mental health business, should all over you. You should do this and you should do that and you should try fish oil. So, and now it's good for the marriage because she knows if I get a little moody, that it's not her fault.
Mm.
I told her today, because I was having a really bad day. I'm having a really bad day today. So I sent her a text. She asked me how I was doing. I said, I'm cycling down. So that way she didn't get blindsided when she gets home by some angry guy who's depressed,
Yeah.
And one of my triggers is disappointing her. So she's made kind of a joke out of it, which is actually helpful because I'll do something stupid. And I'll say, "Honey, are you mad?" She goes, "No, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed."
Aw.
If you let other people in, then they're there to help you and understand. And my cycle lasts about 3 days. I'll be headed down for about a day. Tomorrow I'll flatten out, and the next day I'll be on my way back up. Just my cycle. Major depressive disorder lasts anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks and recurs like a flat spot on a wheel. It just keeps coming back up every so often.
Yeah, because I
day.
yeah, because I remember you telling me. So in your family, you said your mom and both mom and grandma had major depressive disorder. What did they have? And
Actually, my grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for death.
wow.
And I believe my mother was living with depression. She didn't kill herself quickly. She did it over time with cigarettes and alcohol.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's really socially acceptable suicide.
Yeah.
Cigarette.
I love that you bring up that point, when you talked about when you told your wife what was going on before she saw the video of how, important it is to open up when you're ready to people close to you, like your friends, family, whoever, when you're ready to do that. And another thing that you brought up last time that I thought was really interesting. We talked last time about chronic suicidal ideation. Can you tell me what this is and what your experience speaking about this has been like?
Yeah, because I have major depressive disorder, which is pretty garden variety depression. A lot of people have. Chronic suicidal ideation is far more rare. I've met clinicians who have no idea what I'm talking about. It's not the DSM, that diagnostic. So apparently,
Yeah.
if it doesn't show up in there, it doesn't exist. What it is for people like me, for me and people like me in my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And the story I tell on stage is small. My car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts unbidden: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. Well, every keynote I've given, every training I've done, except for one since 2014, somebody in the audience has that. And sometimes more than one somebody. And they have no idea it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak, all alone. I did a college. Young woman came up afterwards. She goes, "Thank you for your keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She said, "You made me weep." "How did I make you weep?" She said, "Well, your story about your car, get it fixed, buy a new one, just kill yourself. I've been having those thoughts all my life. I just thought I was some kind of freak. I didn't know it had a name. I thought I was all alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I wept."
Wow. Because I remember you telling me that story, after she came up to you after you gave your talk and you talked about what chronic suicidal ideation is. And you remember you sharing with me that many people don't even know what that is. They don't know how to, they might feel that way, but they don't know it's a thing. They don't know it's real. They don't know it has a name. And, even like you mentioned, there's different doctors out there who might not even know about it. And I think that's great that you got up there and you share that you experience that and you go through that, and having these people in the audience sit there, and one of them listening to you can say, wow, now I'm not this like weird person who can't talk about this and can't put it into words and doesn't
Yeah.
really know what it is or how to describe it. And I think that's awesome that that you got up there and you shared that. And obviously, because it's very difficult, I can imagine, to get up on stage and tell a room full of people about that you have experienced chronic suicidal ideation, you've been suicidal, and different things like that, and just to really be able to bring that to a room of people and have someone connect with you and say thank you for doing that, because now I feel like they have some kind of a either connection to you or a better understanding of their own thing.
Well, and by the way, people ask me, does telling your story and all that trigger you? No, it has the opposite effect. Very therapeutic. I get emotional when I tell the story. People get emotional. I make them laugh because I'm a comedian. So you kind of take
Yeah.
But no, it's very therapeutic for me because, I mean, it's possible that these folks that have come up, I've steered them just far enough off the path to suicide that they'll live a normal life. One day it hit me. I'm sort of like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, in that I've been shown what these people's lives might be like if I weren't there to speak and let them know they're not alone. And my second thought was, well, I can't kill myself, because if I did, I'd take all those people with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm stuck.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about. So I know when you get up on stages and you're speaking, we talked about vulnerability last time, and you brought up something about the power in being vulnerable and what that's done for you. So can you tell me, what have you learned about vulnerability when it comes to going on stage and telling your story about being suicidal?
Well, that's my superpower, apparently. I was reading Brene Brown's book on vulnerability. And about halfway through, I thought, oh, dear God, that's my superpower. Because, to see a man get up and talk about things, that matter, about emotions, about being mentally ill, it just doesn't happen very often, because guys, especially like me, who are raised in the South, big boys don't cry. They don't talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's depression or, or a colonoscopy or a PSA test for prostate cancer. Guys just don't, that's not a guy thing. We pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. So for people to see me up on stage being vulnerable, I think it gives them permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding, mental illness and thoughts of suicide without recrimination. I had a young woman, I reached out to her on Twitter and to connect, and we connected, and then I got a DM from her, and she goes, I can't believe it's you. Because yeah, I was last fall was the worst, time in my life, for whatever reason. I was close to ending my life. And I just happened to come across your TEDx talk and thought, well, gosh, if he can make it, maybe I can make it. And so, of course, she did. And she, at the end of the DM, said, listen, I just want to thank you for telling your story, for being vulnerable, for getting up there and bearing your soul on stage. You probably saved my life. So that's the thing about TEDx talks is, and speaking, you'll probably never know all the people. I hope all the people that I perhaps steered just far enough off the path, to suicide, that they did live or will live a normal life. So.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome that you decided to do that and realize the power in being vulnerable, because I know you mentioned, the Brene Brown book you were reading, and how, when you're reading that book, you really start to understand, it's important to be this way. And also I like how you brought up that point, like a lot of the times it isn't normal for most men to sit there and talk about, like hard stuff and difficult things that are like you don't really hear about that as much. So I feel like, for someone to see you on stage doing that, definitely, I think, helps them be able to open up more and say, okay, if this guy's out here, telling his story and talking about such like personal things to him in his life, then maybe I can open up to somebody else or open up to you. And then they send you messages and,
Yeah.
come up to you and thank you for sharing the stuff that you did, because, at the end of that talk that you gave, something that you said resonated with them and stuck with them to the point that made them realize that they can do something they thought they couldn't do before.
Yeah, I did a dental convention 2 years ago, January, and I made a little mini keynote, told a story about my chronic suicidal ideation about the car. And everybody's leaving the room. I'm packing my bag up front, and there's a woman coming toward me, and I can see she's crying. And when she gets up to me, she's weeping so hard she can't speak. So I took a chance and I said, "You got chronic suicidal ideation." She nodded. I said, "You didn't know I had a name. You thought you're some kind of freak." Nod. She said, "You have a therapist back home?" Nod. I said, "We'll do this. When you get back home, make an appointment. Tell the therapist everything you learned. And for God's sakes, don't tell them you learned it from a comedian. Tell them you Googled it. And don't want them to take you seriously." And I got an email from her the next week that said, "I think I was at the dental conference simply to meet you. You've changed my life, and I can't say that about a lot of people."
Wow. That's amazing. Like, because I remember you telling me about her coming up to you too, and what the reaction that you get from people after you're done talking about this stuff, because, it really, it strikes a chord in them somehow or some way. And, I wanted to ask you, what out of all the talks that you've given and the speeches that you've done on this stuff, what has been for you the biggest lesson that you've learned throughout your entire career when it comes to mental health related issues and topics?
Well, what I learned I learned this early on when I was preparing for my first TEDx, that in the United States, at least last year, one person died of suicide every 11 minutes. But nobody talks about it. They just, as my mother would say, it's just not something you talk about in polite company.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you bring it up and you mention the words depression and suicide, almost everybody has a story. I've heard the most amazing things from people, some of whom I've just met. It's like they've been waiting for somebody to say those words out loud to give them permission. I was on a cruise ship working, and I was in the Lido buffet one morning. Couldn't find a seat. There's a table for two, a woman sitting by herself. I point at the seat. She nods. I sit. She looks up. She goes, "Hey, you the comedian?" I said, "Hey, did you enjoy the comedy show?" She goes, "I did." I said, "Then I'm the comedian." She goes, "What would you have said if I told you I hated it?" They tell me I look a lot like it. She said, "Is cruise comedy all you do?" I get that question all the time. I said, "No, I'm a public speaker. And if you don't mind me bragging, I just nailed down my first TED Talk." She goes, "I love the TED Talk. What's the topic?" Well, I'd had this conversation many times by that point and figured I knew what was coming. So I said to her, depression and suicide. I started to count down in my head. 3, 2, 1. She goes, "I tried to kill myself twice." We've just met.
Yeah.
First time in college, kind of half-hearted, not a big deal. Second time, far more serious, right? I graduated college. I had graduated medical school. I had the knowledge, had the equipment, had the IV started in my ankle. Had the suicide cocktail in one hand, the syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up, the phone rings. She's thinking, do I pick it up? I better, might be somebody who would get worried, come over, interrupt. Picks it up, 13-year-old son. She says, "I don't know if you heard anything in my voice or had a premonition, but he said, 'Mom, don't do anything.'" So I didn't, she said. I didn't give up on the idea of suicide, but I decided not to do it that day because I thought he would feel guilty. Wasn't there something he could do or say to stop my suicide? Well, the good news is
Wow.
there are things you can do, there are things you can say. I said to her, "How old is he now?" She said, "He's 21. I said, "Does he know his phone call saved your life?" And this became the theme of my TED Talk. She goes, "No, how do you start that conversation?" So that's what people pay me to do. My clients often tell me when I arrive, "Hey, look, we just brought you in here, start the conversation on suicide." I talked to a woman I worked for in January, big manufacturing plant in Iowa. Had 2 shifts. It was they have a safety day every year. They decided this year was going to be on mental health suicide prevention. So I came in, I did a keynote for each shift. We were talking, been 3 weeks ago now, I guess. She goes, "You have no idea the impact you had." She said, they have 2 nurses on staff. That's how many people they have, in the plant. And she goes, "Guys came in after you left, because 90% of them men. Three guys came in after you left and told the nurses, they were struggling with mental illness issues, and mentioned my name as the reason they were in there seeking help from the company." So you never can tell.
Wow. And I think that's amazing that when you bring that stuff up, you are right. It does bring that out in people where they feel like they can talk about it, because I feel like for the longest time, I really agree with you, especially, I know people who would say, like you said, you don't talk about that. We don't get into this. We don't,
We
if
don't.
someone does bring it up, it's like, no, we don't next, like we change the subject, something else. We can't get into this. But I feel like for you, like when you gave that example of you were at the bar and you met that woman at the bar and you were talking about this, and you said your TED talk was on depression and suicide, that's when she shared with you, she tried to end her life twice. And for, for some reason you're sitting there like, this is a complete stranger. We don't know each other. We just met. We literally just met, said a few words to each other, and now you're comfortable enough to say that to me. And you're right, because when you put that out there and you bring it up like that, and you really talk about, this is what you're doing with the TED Talks and the topics that you're covering, I feel like it definitely does bring like a sense of making people more comfortable telling you their stuff or their connection to that or their experience to
Yeah.
that. And I feel like, that's something that's so huge, because if you don't talk about it, then what happens?
Silence kills.
Yeah.
You hear people say this all the time. We had no indication. We had no idea. He gave or she gave no hints. But here's
Mm-hmm.
the deal. There, 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which tells me 8 or 9 out of 10 people want somebody to see something, say something, intervene, stop. So that's the good news. And you can do that by doing something as simple as starting a conversation.
Yeah, because you're right. When you don't do anything, you don't say anything, that silence does kill.
Yep.
And the fact that tell me about what are the other, because I know you said you've done five TED Talks, right? Five TED Talks. And the one of them you covered chronic suicidal ideation, suicidal, and what are the other topics that you get into on the TED Talks?
The second one was in Scarsdale, New York, very wealthy area. And it was done at a high school. And what they were trying to impress upon the high school students was that money's not everything. So, doing what you love for a living and perhaps serving mankind is rewarding as well. Um, Viktor Frankl's, no, Nietzsche said, what is a life of means without meaning?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the theme of the talk. And I talked about the work that I did and how much it meant to me and meant to other people. It's my purpose and my passion. It's my why. It gets me out of bed in the morning. The third one was mental with benefits, the evolutionary advantages of mental illness.
Mm.
Everybody I met who wasn't completely dysfunctional, that had a mental illness, has some kind of superpower, artistic, great writer, comedian, musician, athlete. Uh,
Yeah.
can't be a coincidence. So I did a little research on evolution, and it turns out a lot of things that way back eons ago, the cavemen and women, were survival skills then are now considered disability. Like those,
Mm.
like bipolar disorder. Back in the day, anthropologists think everybody was bipolar because they had 4 months in the summer to gather enough stuff for 8 months in the winter. So man, they had to go at it. They just had to be manic, hunters and gatherers. And
To get that done.
yeah, to get that done.
Yeah.
And now you got now you got 8 months worth of stuff. You need somebody to organize it. So who better than somebody with OCD who is compulsively organized? And so these were like chapter and verse. Everything we think of as a disability at this point had served some purpose way back when, and it's just continued, in the population to this day, and it's become disability. But the point of the TEDx was for children. What if those of us living with with mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation?
Mm.
What if we could convince a child, yeah, you have this mental illness, but here's what they never tell you. You have mental ableness your peers can't touch. And so we wrap our arms around, we energize, we celebrate whatever their mental ableness is. To the point, by the way, 3 weeks ago on 60 Minutes, I did that talk in 2018. 2020 on 60 Minutes, 30 Fortune 500 companies are now hiring people on the autism spectrum for their special abilities and paying them handsomely. Again,
Wow.
mental ability. I think mental illness is simply a combination of mental illness and mental ableness. I believe my
Mm.
depression, suicide thoughts are just the flip side of my creativity, imagination, comic ability, because it's just the way my brain works.
Yeah, and that's I love how you bring that up and, noticing that a lot of people who have mental illness have, are very creative and very and innovative and different and have kind of like a more artistic approach to certain things. Cause I've noticed that as well. Cause I know when you brought up the bipolar thing, that's because I'm bipolar. So I noticed that too. And it's like when you bring that up, and I like how, getting into these TED Talks, because I feel like are you planning on doing any more in the future?
Oh yeah, I've got three of them right now, and I submit all the time. I submit them, submit number one, then number two, and then number three, then go back to number one. One of them is called depressive realism. There is some scientific evidence that people who are depressed see the world more clearly than people who are neurotypical.
Mm.
Um, there's something called negative cognitive bias that people who are depressed have. But there's also something called positive cognitive bias, where you sort of you think the upside is going to be farther up than it actually is.
Mm.
That's one of them. The what's the realism? Like there's one on actually there's one on my trip back from Cambodia at the beginning of the pandemic, where I got in big trouble because everybody thought I came back dragging the virus. That's going viral. How the coronavirus and the cancel culture killed my comedy career. Oh, and the fifth one is my personal favorite: mental health and the orgasm. Treat your depression
Uh,
single-handedly.
I love that. I love that you said you've done five so far, and
Yep.
those are the three that you are gonna be doing, right? Those three?
Well, and the mental health and the orgasm I did in Durango, Colorado.
Oh, you did.
Yeah,
When?
November. Well,
Oh, this month, November.
a year ago, November.
Okay.
But TED.com has the final say on what goes up on YouTube, and they refuse to put it up. They
Oh,
wouldn't tell me
oh.
why. And I said, look, just edit it any way you like. Put it up. And they wouldn't. So I'm pitching it again,
Yeah.
hoping that whoever looks at it at TED next time won't be the same person, and they won't take umbrage at whatever it was I said. And so that's actually will be a repeat. It was like I thought about advertising it, the TED Talk. It was too controversial to post.
Oh yeah. That is really funny that you say that, because especially putting that out there, but that's great that you're going to continue to push to have it out there and to really put that out there, because I think that's great. So
It's the only one I've ever gotten standing ovation for. It was hysterical because it's kind of a combination of comedy and science. And
yeah.
my favorite joke, which my wife hated and told me to take out, was I'm talking about, masturbation, orgasm, and not that palliative effects, what it does for your body. It reduces cortisol and
Yeah.
and raises the whatever it is, the love hormone. I can't think what the love hormone is. And DHEA and
Oxytocin or
oxytocin, yeah. It
yeah.
jacks up your oxytocin. Anyway, about halfway through, I look at the audience and I said to them, you guys know why they call an orgasm an orgasm? And they're looking at me and I go, because nobody can spell.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
And I said to the audience, oh, thank God you like that. My wife hated it.
Frank, oh my goodness, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for, taking the time out of your day to have this conversation and to really share the work that you've done and the work that you're still working on for mental health, for giving these talks on suicide prevention, talking about chronic suicidal ideation, and sharing your story and talking about, your experiences, where you've been, what you've gone through, what you've learned from it. I think it's awesome. I think it's great. And, it's always good talking to you and getting to virtually sit down with you and just chat with you. So,
And I've got 12 coaching clients for TED. I've got another dozen that have all done one. One young woman's done two.
mm-hmm.
And they all have an idea worth spreading. A number of them are on mental health topics. A young woman who got her first one she ever applied for. She applied for 6.
Wow.
First one she'd applied to took her, and she came within, quarter of an inch of slicing her own throat, and survived that. And so she's speaking on that. And I've got another guy speaking on something called individuation. Have you ever heard of individuation?
Individuation. I've heard that word, but what is it?
Yeah,
Tell
don't
me.
feel bad. I've never even heard it. It's sort of like a midlife crisis. In that the title of his talk that we came up with was, what if who you are is not really who you are? You've been living your life to to meet everybody else's expectations up to this point. You know, if your dad was a doctor, mom was a doctor, you know, the pressure's on to be a doctor. But you really don't want to be a doctor. And at some point, you know, a lot of people would just go alone. No, I'm done. And it varies from the mid-20s to the, you know, to who knows how old. And he, in fact, at 40, decided he was a banker, very successful. But he, you know, he's thinking, I wouldn't cut out to be a banker. He's now a coach and a trainer and a speaker, which is what he really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
And he said, look, here's the deal. When you make a change like that, if you've been meeting everybody else's expectations and you pull that, there's going to be collateral damage. His wife left him. His mother didn't speak to him for the day she died.
Wow.
But he's happier, you know, with the change, happy as he's ever been. So
he's happy.
He's going to talk about. So that's the beauty and the joy of coaching TEDx.
Yeah. Individuation. That's awesome. That's going to be a good one. Well, yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And you know what, Frank? Thank you. Thank you once again for coming out and chatting with me and really talking about all this stuff. Cause I know, you know, it's not always easy to get into this, but I think it's so important. I think it's so awesome that you do that. And that the fact that you have, you know, help people out, you've had people come up to you, you've had people reach out to you and just share the value they've gotten out of hearing you speak. So I think that's great. And that's so beautiful to me. So.
And humor makes it easier to swallow.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, it does. Always. All right, guys. Well, everyone listening, whether it is the daytime, nighttime, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day or night. And on that note, we are going to end this episode. So goodbye, guys, and goodbye, Frank.
Bye.